Hey everyone, it's Lindsay at V-Dog here, and I am with Susan and Richard Pitcairn. Dr. Pitcairn is a veterinarian and PhD, and together they've co-authored a book about natural healing for dogs, and their most recent book features heavily plant-based diets for dogs as well. And we're so happy to have them here. We're going to ask some questions about plant-based diets for dogs and get their perspective from their years and years of expertise. So thank you so much for joining me here, Richard and Susan.
Yeah, you're welcome.
Thank you. And thanks for all that you do for helping dogs be vegan in a healthy way. We do recommend
so happy.
Your foods, actually.
Thank you. We're so happy to do it. It's our passion, and we love to see the dogs happy and healthy. So thank you for that. So let's jump right in here. We have some questions that we've gathered, and the first one is, do you recommend a vegan plant-based diet for dogs, and why?
Yes, that's an important part of our book, this last edition. We have three basic reasons that we've begun to advocate that approach. For me as a veterinarian, of course, the first thing that came up was health considerations. And it turns out, I don't know how much detail you want to go into, but it turns out I came to realize that there's a tremendous amount of chemical contamination in animal products over the last few decades. There's over 100,000 chemicals that are now made and used in our culture, hundreds of which now accumulate in animals' bodies, some of which are carcinogens, some of which are poisons. And so I'm being very quick about this, so we can go into it more if you like, but it turns out, I found out that, say if a dog is eating very much meat, they're going to be getting a pretty significant load of these chemicals, hundreds of them in their body. So that was a big factor in looking at alternatives.
And that's because the meat is at the top of the food chain, and toxins accumulate in animal fats. And so meat is not, we think of it as being high protein, but actually it's very high in fat. Nearly all cuts of meat, like hamburgers, maybe like, only 23% protein, the rest of it's essentially fat. So things like dioxin are one of the most toxic chemicals in the world. Like 95% of it is found in animal fat, or it comes in that way. And then like some studies have been done of dogs and cats, and for example, some studies have found that the levels of toxins are significantly higher in pets than they are in people, due to the kind of food they're eating, which is low grade and kind of the crummier stuff in the food chain, right? And they typically have like 23 times more, it's like fire retardants, 5 times more mercury, and they exceed some of the dog food samples and pet and cat food samples that have been tested, have given levels up to 120 times, the level of some of these long-lasting toxins and heavy metals like mercury. So that's a big part. So the second reason.
Well, and I might add to that. I know it's a little bit confusing, but the references we have for what these substances do to us health-wise are basically based on human application. So there's Proposition 69 from California that set up a standard. That's our reference standard that we have to compare to, because no one has done a study in dogs and cats to find out what the standard should be. So when Susan was saying the level of, was it mercury, was 120 times what it is allowed in humans, that's pretty significant.
Yeah.
But granted, we don't know exactly how sensitive they are. My general impression as a veterinarian is that the cats especially are more sensitive to chemicals than people are. So I think it's a big concern. The other concerns or angles on this are the question of resources for the earth, because if we keep raising animals for food, it's very inefficient. And can we keep doing that with the increasing population?
Right, and if dogs and cats were a nation, if U.S. dogs and cats were a nation, they would be the 5th largest consumer of animal products on the planet. And that's kind of astounding, really. So, and this has only gotten worse in recent years as a lot of holistic veterinarians have gotten into the habit of recommending the raw diet, which really means mostly meat. And it's just, since when we started, in the 1980s, recommending fresh food diets, and we would have like a certain amount of meat, a certain amount of grains and vegetables and supplements and so on. And it was maybe the meat was about, a quarter to a third of the total diet by bulk. And animals did quite fine on that. But this paleo type diet for dogs and cats became very popular. And the truth is that dogs do require more protein, for example, than human beings do. We require a surprisingly small amount, like 6% of total calories, whereas dogs is more like 18%. So you don't want to just feed your dog the same thing that you're eating, unless you happen to have a high protein diet. So that's why it's important to balance it. We made every effort in our book to do that. But back to the eco part. I did some calculations on this at one point. It was really interesting. If you take say a 70-pound dog, maybe a golden retriever or something, and the number of calories it should be eating per day, and if say it lives over 11 years, and we're comparing two dogs, one of them eats a completely vegan diet, and the other one goes to the other extreme and eats the mostly raw meat diet, with just a few of its calories coming from vegetables, say. Okay, over 11 years, if you use the numbers based that we found in the movie Cowspiracy, your vegan dog would save 8.8 million gallons of water, 5.5 acres of rainforest, 180 tons of grain, which could go to feed the starving humans in the world, about 1 billion of them, 80 tons of CO2 equivalents, over 8,000 animals' lives, and enough fossil fuel to drive around the earth 15 times. So that in itself, if a dog can be reasonably healthy to us, that's really worth it. And then the third reason.
Yeah, and the third is a concern about what we call animal ethics, where we're concerned with the factory farming of animals has gotten increasingly, increased suffering for animals. They're more crowded, they're given more drugs. It's very, very painful. We're talking millions, sometimes billions, depending on the species, of animals that suffer their whole life. It's just a terrible thing to do to another form of life. So those are the three major things that we consider in our book and we focus on in communication.
And it's easy to overlook that ethical, humane part and just think it's kind of a minority of it, or, it's out of sight, out of mind, but really that's 98 to 99% of the farmed animal products that are available to us are coming from those kinds of conditions. And
some people will say to me, oh, I only get grass-fed livestock, but they don't realize that most of the grass-fed animals are taken to a feedlot before they're slaughtered. So, it's kind of overlooking the whole, what's actually happening to them. Should we really be treating animals like this? Is really the question from that standpoint, from the ethical standpoint. Do we have any right to do that to them?
And when people do take the step of feeding their animals vegan, once they see that it can be healthy, and that, of course, that's a consideration. You want to be kind to your companion animal. But once they take that step, it just feels a lot better in your heart to know that you are not hurting other animals to be keeping yours alive. Mm-hmm. So it just feels better, right? I mean, I'm sure you know that, Lindsay.
Yeah, I love that.
Mm-hmm. And also, we do see that when animals are switched over, especially dogs who do it readily, their health improves. They become more active and vital and have less symptoms and so on. So it really confirms that this thing of chemicals is really significant, I think. I think it's behind a lot of disease these days.
And when we were asked by Rodale Press to write the 4th edition, actually, of our rather classic book, and in 2016, I think is when they asked us, and we published it in 2017. And we had ourselves just become vegan a couple of years before that. We'd been vegetarian for a long time. And so we weren't sure. We thought it might be a good idea. So we consulted, first of all, people such as yourself that have been producing, vegan pet foods for a long time, and looked to see, if you were having good results, and there were a lot of good testimonials. We consulted a number of other veterinarians, because Richard wasn't in practice at that point, who were doing that, and or who was just had anecdotal stories. Like one told us about a 20-year-old little fluffy dog that was in for its first veterinary visit at age 20, and the owners kind of said, or the companion lady said essentially, I don't, kind of, she was shy about admitting it, but she said, I feed the dog essentially what I eat myself, and it's vegan. And he was amazed and impressed. It was a really healthy dog. And so, and at the time, one of the oldest living dogs in the world, Ramble, raised by a lady in the UK, had been eating a vegan diet, as had been all of her other large dogs who were exceptionally long lived. So we consulted these different kinds of people to see what exactly were they feeding, especially if they're feeding a fresh food diet. And Jan Allegretti was another one we consulted, who's written some books on this. So we in this edition of our book, we kind of pulled together the experiences of a number of different veterinarians, as well as people that are especially focused on dog health. And here's one of them, for example, just to read you. This is from Margot Roman, a veterinarian in Massachusetts, and she's raised 5 generations of standard poodles. She says predominantly plant-based and homemade with fresh organic whole food. And then she describes her diet on her website, which is mashvet.com. She says the 5th generation is now 5.5 months old. Their teeth are all coming in beautifully, straight and fine. They eat lots of lentils, garbanzos, black beans, varies it sometimes with peas, always blends it in a Vitamix, uses oats, quinoa, lots of pureed vegetables, fruits, berries, and squash. And so 5 generations tells you that, this is working.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
It's really amazing how much information is out there. And now that, at V-Dog, we've been around for more than 15 years now. So as these years really pile up and the dogs are generation after generation so healthy and thriving, I'm really glad you brought up those sort of 3 pillars, especially the bioaccumulation aspect, because that's not something that I think a lot of people think of. And I think that's really good information to share, because it's something that, it's just not readily available information. So thank you for elaborating on that aspect too. Something I'm curious about is the whole veterinary world in itself. This is new information, right? The whole, as much as we've been doing plant-based food for dogs for a while, in the veterinary community, it's not as accepted. So Dr. Richard Pitcairn, when you and Susan, both of you kind of transitioned over to this, you went vegan yourselves, did you face any sort of pushback within the vegan community, or even within the naturopathic community that you're a part of? And what do your fellow veterinarian colleagues think of this? Is it sort of, is it challenging to get these facts across? What's your experience like there with other veterinarians on this topic?
Well, I can generalize. Say most veterinarians that are in practice don't really have any training in nutrition. So they just simply accept what all of us accepted, or certainly what I accepted as I grew up, that the way you eat is you include meat in your diet. It was perfectly normal. And so most veterinarians and most people that are not veterinarians that have animals just have the assumption or the belief that their dogs, say, should eat meat, that that's their natural diet, which is, it's understandable, because in nature, that's what they do. What they're not realizing is that dogs that are kept in domestic relationship are not in nature. They're not out hunting. They're not eating wild animals. They're eating these, what we talked about earlier, these farm-raised, intensively raised animals that are exposed to a lot of things that are not healthy. So it's hard to communicate that. When you try to tell veterinarians that, they generally reject it. I would say most veterinarians, if you went in with your dog and said, I feed it a plant-based diet, they would criticize you, most of them. They don't understand it, they don't accept it. I might add to that, just as support for the position of feeding that way, is a study came out a couple of years ago where they did a sequencing of the DNA of dogs and wolves and compared them. And they found that dogs, over time, have developed the same genes that people have, so they can eat the same food people eat, no problem.
Specifically, they make more DNA, about 4 or 5 times, I think it is, more DNA than wolves do, that produces amylase that digests starches. And so when people have all this concern about feeding grains to dogs, it's really essentially not valid. I mean, and if you look, like when we were researching our book, I looked on Wikipedia under the history of dog food. And there was a section that was very interesting. It's like way back in ancient times, the Greeks were actually advocating feeding primarily beans to dogs and barley and things like that. And maybe occasionally little leavings of the stew pot, you know, it's like, that's what they were actually saying. There were different people in history that were saying even that it wasn't a good idea to feed meat to dogs. I mean, it was really only in the last couple of centuries in Europe that this became enough of a possibility due to the luxury standards at which people were living, that they could feed dogs that. So wolves really were just scavengers with regards to human encampments, you know, early on, and they learned to kind of get the discards, which probably included some bones and meat, but also lots of grain. And to your question about what veterinarians think, the same comes up for human beings. I mean, a lot of people still don't quite accept or believe that you can be healthy as a vegan, even though it really has been shown. And a lot of the important thing is just learning how to do it healthfully, get enough calories, get enough protein, you know, get certain nutrients that might be a little lower. And so we really appreciate that you and other people like you have formulated dry foods or whatever that makes it easy for people to do that, because not everybody can cook at home. We used to advocate a fresh food diet and saw a difference there. I think because of there, a lot of the difference was it was higher quality meat that we were having people feed when it was fresh, human grade. But now that you're feeding high quality, you know, low toxin foods in a commercial kibble, it seems like there's much more opportunity for an animal to be healthy on a processed food like that. And of course you can add fresh food snacks.
And I might add too, just I think helpful to understand that there has been this whole movement, maybe the last 20 years, I'm guessing, towards feeding what they call a raw diet, you know, more meat and bones. And they at the same time, there was a lot of criticism of grains as being not healthy. It's important to know that was not based on any science. There was no research to support that idea. Somebody just put that idea out. My mind tends to be suspicious and think, who put out the idea were the people that want to promote meat-based diets, you know.
And they're the same ones promoting it for humans, the paleo diet.
Yeah, but there was no science to show that. And in fact, and there is research that's done raising animals on grains to show they're quite healthy on that. So there's a lot of misinformation, as you said earlier, unfortunately.
Yeah, absolutely. And we talk about grains quite often at V-Dog. We've always had healthy grains in our food. It's never been a grain-free food. And we often even have customers that come to us really confused because they or their vets lump in like this alternative plant-based food and kind of assume it's grain-free because it's like this boutique industry that's been created. But we always clarify, we're like, no, our food is not grain-free. It's always had healthy grains in it. And there's definitely a lot of misconceptions about that. And you're right that we also have articles on our website about how the grain-free sort of marketing movement really wasn't founded in much of any science. So that's really important to bring up too. And to add to that, allergies, the category of allergies is so huge in those that feed our diet, V-Dog, as well as just general plant-based diets. Dogs are so itchy and so prone to have so many allergy issues that are really alleviated with this type of diet. And it's grain-free has been called out as a solution for that, when in reality, there are so many different types of grains, as you both know, and a lot of them are really, really healthy ingredients. And our food has shown to help so many really itchy, uncomfortable dogs, and there have been grains in there all along. So that's important to bring up too. It's the fact that it's plant-based and it's easily digestible is really important.
When you formulate your dog foods, I mean, from what I've seen, the research shows that of the top 10 allergens, only like 2 or 3 of them are plant-based. It's mostly meats, and that's what he found in practice too. and eggs and fish and so on. But that wheat would be one of them. And a lot of people seem to react to wheat also. Now, one of my theories, and I think probably other people share this theory, is that the reason that wheat has become a questionable food for a lot of people is that, especially when it's not organic, they've applied glyphosate in many cases, also known as Roundup, to desiccate the wheat prior to harvest. And so it's very likely contaminated. So do you use wheat in your foods? And if you do you use organic or what?
So we never use wheat, corn, soy, added gluten, and of course animal products. So we never use wheat, so we eliminate those top highly sprayed GM crops right from our formula from the start, just because we wanted to keep it as pure as possible. So the food itself is conventional. These ingredients, and we get a lot of questions about why is vegan food so expensive? It's just plants, which also crosses over to the human area as well, because as we know, animal products, especially meat, are heavily subsidized. If you went to McDonald's and a burger wasn't subsidized, it would cost something crazy, like, I don't know, 5 to 10 times as much, something like that. So the cost factor there is an element as well. I want to get in one more question from our Instagram followers here before we have the time up, and sort of related to the last question is, do you have any advice for our customers or people who are looking to feed a plant-based diet when they go to their veterinarians and they're kind of a little bit nervous that their vet's not going to support it? Do you have any advice for them, for new people transitioning their dog to this diet, and how to interact with a vet and what they should come prepared with, if anything, if you have any suggestions for that?
Seems like it might depend on whether or not their animal is basically healthy and in for a wellness check, or if it's really got some serious problems. And so I would say that the person needs to, let the veterinarian know that there's a lot of long-term anecdotal information showing that this diet can be healthy, and that people that are that people that people that are carefully formulating the foods, that they do meet the AFCO standards that veterinarians are told. So whereas if a person's a client and they come in and they're just feeding this and that, it might be questionable. So I would say the first thing to do is make sure you have your ducks in a row, so to speak, and that you're feeding a diet that's well formulated, whether it's commercial or homemade. And we've made every effort in our book to really make sure that every recipe meets the AFCO standards. There are other books that sometimes recommend feeding, various kinds of diets. And I know people that are feeding pretty much what they eat, like Rick Esselstyn from Forks Over Knives and the Fire Engine 2 diet. And he told me one time he just feeds his dog what he eats, and he doesn't worry at all about different nutrients, and his dog's healthy. So, I mean, that can happen too. But I think it's important to have some science behind you.
Well, yes, but you're going to, let's be practical. Most veterinarians are going to not accept that. It doesn't matter what you tell them. They're going to say you shouldn't do it. They'll advise you. So the people that are listening to this should realize that it's likely they will be criticized, and they just have to be clear in their own minds that they have to do their own thinking and research on this. Another option is to go to our website, which is drpitcairn.com, drpitcairn, one word, .com. And there is a menu item there that says referrals. And they can go down, and these are veterinarians that have studied with us. A lot of what I teach focuses on homeopathic medicine, but we include discussion of nutrition in our meetings. And most of them that have studied with us have heard our
Rigorous lectures on this.
our lectures and our promotion for this, what we're talking about.
Read our book.
And so they will, at least some of them have accepted this, and they themselves are advocating this. Some may not accept it that much, but they're willing to let it go. You understand what I mean?
They're open-minded.
They're open-minded enough. So anyway, that's a good place to go, is to look for a referral in your area if possible. It's organized by state. I know there's not a large number of them. There's less than 200 probably listed as referrals, but at least it's an option. It might work for some. Yeah,
we understand that it's not easy, because people have thinking, kind of fixed in certain ways. But you could also suggest, that people might want to give their veterinarian a copy of our book so they can see, how we came to this conclusion.
Yeah.
So.
Yes. Yeah. And I want to hear more about your book. One thing I'll add before that is on the V-Dog site, we also have a veterinarian's page. And on there, we have a downloadable PDF guide that anyone listening can bring this into their veterinarian. So we try to provide these resources as well. It talks about V-Dog, it talks about plant-based diets and dogs for general. So you can either kind of have that on your phone or you can print it out if you want and bring it in. So in addition to looking at Dr. Pitcairn's resources of veterinarians to connect with, as well as the V-Dog page, we're trying to arm everyone with the best information possible. So thank you for that advice. And we're almost at time, but yeah, absolutely. I see a copy of the book in the background, but can you tell us the name of it and where people can get it if they're interested, and what I know there's some home cooking recipes in there, which some people are interested in.
Yeah, this is the 4th edition of a book that's been in print since 1981, originally with Rodale Press, which was purchased a few years ago by Penguin. But it's Dr. Pitcairn's Complete Guide to Natural Health for Dogs and Cats. And this is the last, I think, edition we'll ever do. And this has about a third of the book. It goes into the whys and wherefores on how to feed dogs and what the problems are.
A lot more detail
we go
about
into
what we talked about.
The ecotoxic and humane problems, and then we go into what to feed and go into like listing different kinds of how much proteins in different food and this and that. We have charts in here that compare we have like about 10 or 15 fresh food diets for both species, for dogs and for cats. Cats are a little trickier, but we, and sometimes supplements that we add to suggest that you use. And then this shows actually how much, calculating it out. Computers are very helpful these days, like, how much protein there is, how much methionine, taurine, vitamin A, and all these things. And so because of having all that information, we were able to then code the different diets according to different health problems, like the ones that are good for allergies or skin problems, diabetes, or, growth, kidney disease, and different conditions like that. So you can tailor a fresh food recipe to your animal. And I should add, as much as the service that you provide is really excellent to do commercial foods, that there are some people who've been feeding their dogs vegan for 20 or 30 years who do feel that the best thing is the fresh food diet, and with a lot of variety. So it's either way though, it seems like you've had some really good results. And when we go on Amazon, for example, and look at your food as well as some other competitors, the reviews that people leave there are really interesting too, like how their animals' skin problems really cleared up, or their itchy ears or whatever. So that might also help encourage people who are on the fence about this.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, the book looks so wonderful. I know I have a copy at our office and I've read it, so I recommend it. And whether anyone watching is interested in feeding a packaged diet like V-Dog, or cooking at home, or even a lot of our customers will do a combination of both, kind of top with fresh food, or like you said, Susan, give fresh food as treats. My little chihuahua here, he really loved chickpeas, just like rinsed from the can. They're like a nice, really simple, high protein little treat. So I always recommend that. But it's been so wonderful speaking with you both. I think we can end it there, unless, is there anything else that you'd like to add?
I would like to add just one simple thing, just kind of a plug for VeggiePet. It's a supplement that's made there's a veggie dog and a veggie cat. And they were created a long time ago, like in the 1980s, by people who were trying to feed vegan food to the dogs. And so they've tried to make up things like taurine, and for cats, like taurine for cats, and things that can be a little deficient in what you can create at home. So during this last edition of the book, I did a lot of the work on the dietary part, and I consulted with the people who had purchased VeggiePet and were reformulating their supplements. And so we tailored them together to make sure that when using those supplements, that everything would be completely adequate, and particularly for dogs that are like in growth, like puppies and moms and so forth. So that's important, especially for cats. I just want to put that in, especially for cats. It's crucial that you feed some supplement like that, or a carefully formulated commercial product.
Yes, that's really important. We get a lot of questions about puppies, so that's good to know that there's information about that in your book as well. And of course, always feeding a complete and balanced diet, no matter what diet it is so crucial. And adhering to all those nutritional guidelines is so important. So, okay, Richard and Susan, it's been so nice speaking with you. And thank you so much for taking the time. I hope everyone enjoyed watching and learning with us here.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Okay, bye-bye. Thank you.